Hi folks, it's Florida Man here, and today I'm making a pure fun video, the intellectual equivalent of cotton candy, to take a little break from my usual big brain content. Today I'm ranking the various diplomacy maps that I've played on, based on which ones I think are best and worst. I'm not going to pretend that I'm going to be completely objective. Although this list is an attempt to use somewhat rational criteria to say which of the maps I'm familiar with are worst and best, it's also subject, obviously, to my own biases. My favorite maps are definitely closer to the top of the list than the bottom here. And unlike my rankings of which diplomacy powers are best, this list definitely reflects my preferences, at least as much as my analysis. I'll go in order from worst variant to best, so please sit back and enjoy. Number 8. 100. This is a variant you've probably never heard of before. It's playable on Play Diplomacy, and it's a 3-power map based on the 100 Years' War between France and England. The 3 playable powers are England, France, and Burgundy. You might be able to guess what my problem with this map is from the way I've already described it. There are only 3 players in this thing. It's only a little bit different from playing chess as far as I'm concerned. The game is also played on a notably simplified map with fewer spaces and centers. I've only played on this map once, but it left me without much desire to try again, because it feels less like diplomacy and more like 3-player chess. Number 7. 1900. On the flip side, the next variant up on my list is 1900. I've played this map only once as well, but unlike 100, I would be willing to give it another shot sometime. The main reason this map falls this low is that in my opinion it does what the classic map does, but it does it in an essentially inferior way. I don't like the way it looks. I don't like the way that England could go and attack Turkey right away. I don't like how much of the classic version of the diplomacy map this one throws out. It's amazing how different something can be that's set in the same region as the classic map. But there it is. And those are all personal preference factors. However, I also have to give what I would consider my objective reason for disliking this map. I think it's less well balanced than the classic map. Specifically, it nerfs Turkey drastically, and it also weakens Russia a bit, while turning Germany into a superpower and making Italy almost as strong. I came to this conclusion after I went through the 261 games that have been played on this map on Play Diplomacy without fog of war stuff happens or escalation applied. Those are all different ways of making the game more interesting and non-classic, so I removed them in order to sort through these and figure out which powers were objectively stronger and weaker. I isolated the solos that each country received, and what I observed was that Germany had more than twice as many solos as Turkey, Italy had exactly twice as many solos as Turkey, and the gap between those countries and Russia was almost as large. The map does strengthen the relatively weak Austria and England, and it maintains France as a reasonably strong power, but the balance is weaker here. In the classic diplomacy map, there is no power that is twice as likely to win as another power, at least not based on Play Diplomacy's stats. There's almost that gap between Italy and Turkey, with Turkey being the most likely power to win on Play Diplomacy and Italy being the least likely on the classic map. But it's still not as bad as 1900, where one power is more than twice as likely to win as another. From my point of view, the best excuse for creating a variant that covers the same region as the classic map would be to fix imbalances in the original map. Those imbalances do exist, but I can't praise a variant that makes the imbalances worse rather than better. And that brings me to number 6. Number 6, Milan. I've only played on the Milan map once, and that was a gunboat game, so I can't speak as much to personal experience with this as I can with all of the others. The great things about this variant are, just like the classic map and the 1900 variant, it has 7 players, which I think is a very solid number, and although I don't think it improves on the classic map, it's clearly trying to do so by altering the Italian position in a way that theoretically makes it less likely that Italy and Austria bump heads early on, which should make both of those countries stronger overall. Unfortunately, when I looked at the numbers for solos on this map, Italy was still the least likely power to solo in this variant, and Germany and Russia were each more than twice as likely to win as Italy. In fact, Italy was less than 1/3 as likely as Russia to win in the Milan map. The weakest power, being less than half as likely to win as the strongest power, is going to remain the hard line for me, for what makes a variant clearly inferior to the classic map in terms of playability. I will say, if the classic map did not exist, I would probably spend a lot of time playing on the Milan map, because it's at least the most similar to the classic map on the surface. Number 5. Ancient Med. This is as high as a variant with fewer than 7 players will make it on this list, and part of why it rises as high as it does is that I just find Ancient Med to be a pretty fun variant, even though it does have too few players and it's much worse balanced than the classic map, and even worse balanced than the 1900 map, although the balance is not quite as bad as the balance for Milan. Egypt is significantly less likely to win than any other power in Ancient Med, less than half as likely to win as either Carthage or Persia, and Greece is also significantly disadvantaged, although not as much as Egypt. However, in designing a variant with relatively few powers, I think it's probably hard, or close to impossible, to actually make a well-balanced game while producing an interesting map, as opposed to the Five Italies map, which is aggressively boring to the point that I don't think I would ever play it unless it was just for the purpose of testing my skill at the game, but on the other hand, is also a perfectly balanced variant, as all things should be. The great thing about Ancient Med is that it's a very interesting map. It reflects an interesting period of history, although I don't believe there was ever a period of history when all of these powers were actually viable rivals of each other simultaneously, and it's a good-looking map. It's a fun map to play, and that's worth a lot to me. Number 4. South American Supremacy. I don't have any stats on which powers are more likely to win in this map, but I can say that the positioning of each country seems pretty good for balancing purposes. If I'm really honest, though, this variant falls as high as it does on this list purely by virtue of being a variant I enjoyed a great deal the one time I actually played it. That was probably mostly down to the really great players and GM involved in the game, rather than being mainly due to the quality of the map itself. I don't have any real reason for thinking this map is balanced, and I actually think I have pretty good reasons for thinking it's not, considering the power disparity between different countries the game starts with. But I love the look of the map. I love the vast range of negotiation possibilities. I love the fact that this variant has 8 players, even more than the classic map, which is really cool, because I believe the number of players is correlated pretty strongly with how dynamic and interesting a game can be. And I love the unusual dynamic that the Andes creates, because having a genuine barrier to movement from one region to another is a lot like the stalemate lines that help make the classic map so interesting. This variant feels inventive and clever in a way that most variant maps are not. It's easily a step up from Ancient Med. Speaking of innovative maps, number 3 is one of the most innovative. Number 3. Versailles. Versailles is a variant that's close to so many of our hearts. It feels almost as classic as the classic map, and it builds on the brilliance of the original map by introducing an innovation in the form of minor powers. This innovation should be applied to more map variants, simple as that, because it is an incredibly cool and interesting way to change a game up. I am fairly certain that it has reinvigorated the passions of more than one player who had grown bored of the classic map, and that despite it being a relatively small tweak. Versailles also takes place in a map that's different as a result of being in a different time period, although, to be honest, I don't think that's a particular strength. The weakness of the variant for me is in the fact that the miners are too concentrated in the Balkans regions and surrounding Turkey, creating a game that seems inherently unbalanced. It is impossible to measure the balance of this game, though, because it's completely dependent on who controls which miner, and miners are randomly assigned in every game. However, I feel confident in saying that the balance of this game is worse than that of the classic map, much like almost every other variant map. That's not all bad. In Versailles, I've observed, Italy and Poland tend to be stronger than Italy and Austria are in the classic map. However, that comes at the expense of creating a very fragile Turkey and rendering Russia and Germany much more vulnerable than they were before. Versailles is a variant of big ups and downs, outsized pluses and minuses, big trade-offs. I think the pluses substantially outweigh the minuses, or this wouldn't work its way this high up on my rankings, but I would be lying if I didn't say this variant has its faults. 2. War in the Americas. War in the Americas is the newest of the maps on Play Diplomacy that I've played, and this map is just a big bundle of fun. There's not really enough data about this game to tell us about whether it's well balanced. I suspect it's not. I really don't know. I think the existence of Great Britain actually helps balance the game out, The important thing is that the number of players creates seemingly endless possible ways the game can go. The map feels like it's covering a real place and time in history, and I still feel a strong desire to play this map again, even though I've played it about 8 times in the time since it was established as a part of Play Diplomacy. There are 2 separate spheres of conflict in this map, the North and the South, which is sort of similar to the separation between East and West on the classic map. Although, in War in the Americas, the size of the South American region is notably larger than the size of the North American region. There are 7 countries participating in the southern half at the beginning of the game, while there are only 4 participating in the northern half. The cool thing is the tension of being in your area, trying to survive there, trying to resolve the conflict there, while you're also experiencing the tension of wondering when some things will resolve themselves in the other half of the map, and you'll suddenly have some new problems to consider. Finally, we have the map that you must surely have been assuming would be at or near the top of this list. Number 1, Classic. The Classic map is much like Sean Connery. The original, and coincidentally also the best. I might have my vision colored a little by nostalgia here, but I think the greatness of the Classic design is ultimately the reason why we're talking about all of these other maps at all. It's the granddad of the brand millions of fans have been sold on, and despite having a relatively weak Italy compared to the strong France and Russia, the Classic map is actually constructed with better balance as far as I can tell than any of the variants I've mentioned. For me, the Classic map is not just the original recipe, it's the best. There's not much more I can say about it that hasn't already been said, so let me move on to something I would call an honorable mention. It's a variant I've played that I did not rank, and it's called Unconstitutional. The reason I haven't ranked it here is that I participated in a playtest for this variant, but it wasn't the final version of the map, to my knowledge, and I believe there have been subsequent alterations to the map by the creator, who is continuously tinkering with variants. If I did rank this variant, it would fall between Ancient Med and Milan right now. I really love the originality, and I like the fact that it's in a different region. I really love it when variants are in regions I haven't really seen variants made for before, but I think it's probably about as unbalanced as Ancient Med, and I find Ancient Med more interesting. Both maps have the same number of players as well, and adding additional players adds a lot of value to a variant for me, so this variant does have a low ceiling. There's another variant that I am interested in but I haven't played, and that is on V-Diplomacy. It's called Imperial. But more on that some other time. I hope you've enjoyed my rankings of the various diplomacy maps. It was fun for me to make, and I was optimistic that it would appeal to a lot of you. Much like the video I made where I ranked which diplomacy powers were strongest. If you did enjoy this, you can show your support for regular diplomacy content by liking, subscribing, and commenting below. Let's get to 1,000 subscribers before the end of this year. For some comment ideas, I am curious to know what are your favorite diplomacy maps and why, and also, is there something you thought was wrong with my analysis that you would like to explore? Because I'm always open to being corrected. And now I'd like to take a brief moment to thank the people whose names now appear on screen, who have gone above and beyond to support the channel, either backing us financially on Patreon, or translating the videos into other languages, so we can expand our appeal to other countries and cultures. I've heard that diplomacy apparently has a significant following in China now as well, so if you can translate into Mandarin, please feel free to hit me up. Until next time, Florida Man, out.